It was 7 years ago today, on April 14th, 2008, that I officially became a wrestling fan by watching the April 14th, 2008 edition of Monday Night Raw, and I've been a diehard fan of the product ever since. And what better way to celebrate my 7-year fan-anniversary, as I like to call it, than by watching old pay-per-views on the WWE Network. As I've said in the last couple of weeks, I've been watching all the old Backlash events from 1999 to 2008, 1999, to 2008, and they've all been excellent. I mean, I thought the 99, 2000, 01, 02, and 03 especially were all excellent. 04, no exception. Another great event, which I'm breaking down for you guys right here, right now, on WrestleRant. So kicking off the show, no better way to kick off the show than with a match with Shelton Benjamin and Ric Flair. And a really good match. Now, Shelton Benjamin coming over to Raw, I think in the draft, was being primed as the next big thing. He beat Triple H on 2 different occasions. I think he pinned him one week and then beat him by countout the next week. And he might have beat him by DQ one other week as well. I think he beat Triple H on 3 total occasions, and 3 occasions in total. So that would lead to Shelton Benjamin taking on his protege, Triple H's protege that is, Ric Flair, on pay-per-view, a fellow member of Evolution. So the match itself was really good. I mean, Ric Flair was never, the greatest wrestler. I mean, of all time, of course, but in his WWE tenure at the age that he wasn't the same guy that he was, 10, 15, 20 years later, 20 years earlier. But he was still in great shape. I mean, for a guy that was almost 50, 60 something years old, the guy really moved around at a pretty quick pace and held his own against Shelton Benjamin, had a pretty nice matchup and a great rub. And I mean, it wasn't really more so about the in-ring action. I thought it was really entertaining, but it was more so about giving Benjamin that huge rub. And he got that from working with Flair, working a really good match, and ultimately coming out victorious cleanly. I mean, I thought the finish was a little weird. Ric Flair pulled out, as the dirtiest player in the game, he pulled out a pair of brass knuckles. Shelton Benjamin jumped off the top rope, hit Ric Flair with a crossbody or something, and Ric Flair just kind of died on the ground. And Shelton Benjamin pinned him to get the 1-2-3, and that was it. And then he got the win. So it was a weird ending because Ric Flair never ended up using the brass knuckles. The commentators questioned it. The referee never saw it. So it's a bit of a weird ending, but still a good matchup though. A huge win for Shelton, a nice way to kick off the show. So up next, kind of a filler match here between Jonathan Coachman and Tajiri. I was surprised it went as long as it did, almost 6-7 minutes, and Jonathan Coachman ultimately, surprisingly, came out victorious with help of Garrison Cade, later known as Lance Cade in WWE. But yeah, I mean, the match was exactly what you would expect it to be. Jonathan Coachman was never a wrestler. He was always a personality on WWE TV. And he was always a lot of fun to watch. I know, like I said, he was never a wrestler, but whatever role that they had him in, whether it be commentator or announcer or manager or wrestler or whatever, he always hit it out of the park. He was always a lot of fun to watch, and this was a prime example of that. I thought the match, for what it was pretty nice. And Tajiri was not the same guy that he was 2 years prior, I think, in the 02 installment where he won the Cruiserweight Championship from Billy Kidman, I think it was. He wasn't the same serious heel competitor. By this point in his career, he was pretty much a glorified comedy guy. But still, he was a really good, entertainer, and he worked well with Jonathan Coachman to provide a fun filler match, something that didn't really feel like it wasted or killed. I mean, it killed time, but it didn't feel like it wasted my time, like a Michael Cole versus Jerry Lawler match did at WrestleMania 27. But still, yeah, fun filler. The outcome was pretty surprising, and I think that led into Cade versus Tajiri, maybe at the next pay-per-view, I'm not really sure, but Garrison Cade never really went anywhere. Lance Cade did with Trevor Murdoch a couple years later, but that wouldn't be until like 06 or 07 that the two would. I think it was 06 when the two first paired up and won the tag team titles together. But still, fun for what it was. Never meant anything to be great. Never intended to be anything great, but for what it was, a fun filler matchup from Coachman and Tajiri. Up next, in an intergender handicap match, Chris Jericho taking on Christian and Trish Stratus. Now, I personally love this feud going into WrestleMania 20. I thought it was a really underrated match and feud on the whole. It had a lot of great long-term booking. When it started, I don't know. I think maybe mid-2003. The former tag team champions, Jericho and Christian together. And then collectively known, I think it is Vitamin C, I think what they call themselves. Gotta love that name. And then they broke up with Trish kind of being the person that kind of caused the rift between the two. And then Trish turning heel at WrestleMania and joining sides with Christian against Jericho. So that kind of set the stage for a rematch between Jericho and Christian at Backlash. this time involving Trish on Christian's side in a handicap matchup. So a really entertaining matchup. Trish would kind of only be tagged in when she knew that Christian had him down and out. And I think she hit the Trish kick at one point, or I think Christian hit the kill switch, and then she tagged in, and it was only like a minute or so later. And it wasn't immediately. That's why Jericho kicked out, but she got the pinfall, and then Jericho kicks out. She tags back in Christian. And then it was a good match from there. I think Christian and Jericho kind of carried the in-ring portion, but Trish's involvement didn't drag it down at all. I thought it was a pretty, it made sense. It was fun. It was entertaining. Trish is always great in whatever role she's a part of course. But, the three Canadians kind of clashing in Canada. This pay-per-view did take place, not Manitoba. Let me double check here on Wiki. I can't remember. Oh, Edmonton, Alberta. Not many pay-per-views go to WWE, or not many pay-per-views of WWE's, that is, go to Canada these days, but it was kind of par for the course back, around this time of the year, around this, time in WWE in 04, 05, 03, whatever. But yeah, really, really good tag team match, or really, really good handicap match. I mean, not often will you hear me say that. I don't really like handicap matches more often than not, but I thought this one was fun. It made sense. Jericho and Christian played from an in-ring standpoint, had a really good match, much like they did at WrestleMania. And Trish's involvement was kept limited. It made sense, and it was fun, so I enjoyed it. So up next for the Women's Championship, and also that was not the end of the feud between Jericho and Christian. He would eventually lock in Trish in the walls of Jericho, giving her comeuppance, that is, and getting the win over Christian after an enziguri. But the feud would continue past that point with Jericho beating Christian in a steel cage match, and later feuding with Tyson Tomka, who would make his debut shortly thereafterwards. But that was not the end of the feud. I just wanted to note that. So Women's Championship up next with Victoria taking on Lita. Pretty good matchup again. I mean, like I said in my reviews of 02 and 03 installments of Backlash, I almost said Jazz versus Trish Stratus at both of those events. Oh my god. Jazz versus Trish at both those events were good matches. Or match-wise, I guess you could say, as Jericho would say. But they didn't really have much storyline, importance. I mean, that's why the crowd was never really red hot for those matches. And that was kind of the same thing here. Victoria was the champion going into this matchup. She was the babyface. Lita coming back from, I think it was injury, and then she was a babyface too. And they just didn't really have much character development. I mean, they were both fan favorites, but the people were kind of quiet for the matchup because there really wasn't anyone to have any incentive to cheer over. I mean, both girls were heavily favored by the audience, but why should I cheer this person over this person? They were probably kind of confused on who to cheer for, so there really wasn't any storyline and importance behind this matchup, much like there was with Trish and Jazz for the 2 years prior. So I thought they had a good match. I mean, I thought it was a well-wrestled matchup. They had, some time, a little bit more time than Trish and Jazz did in 02 and 03. But, like I said, the crowd wasn't really into it because they were both baby faces. There really wasn't much reason to care, from what I understand anyway. Like I said, I don't watch the build-up or the aftermath or whatever. I only watch the pay-per-views themselves. Unless it's like a recent pay-per-view, unless it's like 08 to current, I wouldn't know the pre-match build-up for the most part. So I don't know if there really was any reason behind this matchup aside from Lita maybe becoming the number one contender and challenging for the gold at the pay-per-view, but a good match nevertheless, Victoria retaining. Then after the match, Molly Holly and Gail Kim would come down to lay waste to both Victoria and Lita. I guess they were kind of mad they weren't being taken seriously or whatever, and they deserved to be in title contention. Gail Kim was always great. I think that goes without saying. She was always criminally underused in WWE for the time that she was there, and deserves so much better. And she's always been, she's been ripping it up in TNA lately. I think on Friday she had a match with Awesome Kong. I'm recording this on Friday, and I haven't seen the episode yet. But that goes to show how iconic of a feud that was in TNA, and WWE. She never really had that kind of feud because she was never really given the chance. She was a former women's champion, but they really did next to nothing with her for the most of her run in WWE, both times, both in around this time and her latter run with the company from 2009 to 2011, whenever she left. They kind of wasted her talent, but still, it was good to see her kind of make a statement for herself by taking out Victoria and Lita following their championship matchup, along with Molly Holly, who got her head shaved by Victoria at WrestleMania. So up next, and what I thought was, it's really hard to say what was the match of the night because both this match and the main event were stellar. But Randy Orton versus Cactus Jack, Mick Foley, whatever you want to call him, in a hardcore match for the Intercontinental Championship, Evolution banned from ringside. So if you listen to my review of WrestleMania 20 or read my articles on it or listen to my videos or whatever, I loved the handicap match at WrestleMania 20 between Evolution and the Rock and Sock Connection. I think it's a very underrated matchup. And the history between Foley and Orton kind of spilled over onto Backlash, with Foley saying he still got it. By pinning me at WrestleMania via an RKO out of nowhere, you did not prove anything to me. You need to take me on one-on-one in Cactus Jack's kind of matchup with your Intercontinental Championship on the line in a hardcore matchup. Now, it was around this time Randy Orton was the longest reigning Intercontinental Champion, about 7 years, I think it was, and he was slowly proving himself to the masses, but he had yet to have that breakout performance. He was always a great athlete. I think that goes without saying. He had good matches against RVD and others leading up to this point, but he had yet to have that performance that kind of solidified himself as a star. And this was that matchup. I mean, the match was absolutely unreal. I always love Canadian crowds. I'm not from Canada, so it's not like I'm biased, but along with the UK and along with England and all those other crowds overseas, Canada is not overseas, obviously. I'm not an idiot. But those crowds, in addition to Canada, are always awesome, in my opinion. Whether it be in 2015 or in 2004, they were heavily into this matchup. They were very much behind Mick Foley. And after the, embarrassing performance by Foley at WrestleMania 2000, I didn't think he was too bad at WrestleMania 20. He wasn't in the match for the most part. Most of the in-ring work was done by The Rock. So even if he wasn't in the best of shape, it really wasn't that noticeable. But Foley was not all that impressed with his performance personally in that matchup, so I guess he wanted to kind of prove himself and make up for it in this match with Orton on this show, and he absolutely did. I mean, I just wish this would have been his final WWE match, because he would go on to wrestle many of other matches against fucking Carlito and Ric Flair and a random 5-pack challenge in 2007. I felt like, those matches were not worth it. I mean, the match with Edge at WrestleMania 22, how could I forget that? It was phenomenal. That could have been his last match too, but he should have just ended, here on this show. All due respect to Mick, but I know he kept on coming back for the money and whatever else, but there was no reason for him to continue his career past this point. Not only was it a brutal match, that goes without saying, but it was the perfect exclamation point on the career of Mick Foley, Cactus Jack, Dude Love, Mick Foley, or Mankind, whatever the fuck you want to call him, on the career of his in WWE. It was that great of a matchup. All the hardcore spots, or the hardcore bat, Mick Foley bringing one out. Orton had one, I think it broke before the match even began, so he started running for his life. Randy Orton bleeding beyond belief and getting the barbed wire bat stuck behind it, stuck in his groin by Mick Foley. And the best spot of the matchup, the thumbtacks were gruesome. Thumbtack spots, make me cringe. I don't think WWE uses them anymore, and why would they? I know it's PG now, but TNA does them all the fucking time. In every single Monsters Ball match they do the thumbtack spot, and it makes me cringe because you don't need to do it. But, like with Blood, I'm not a huge Blood fan. I think it enhances matches much like it did in this one. But, like with the WrestleMania 31 this past year, and even the Daniel Bryan match from a couple years ago, or a couple weeks ago on SmackDown against Sheamus, I think Blood can really enhance a matchup, a storyline, an angle, whatever, an attack. And when used sparingly, it works effectively. And much like the thumbtack spots as well, that's what it's kind of getting into. And it worked to perfection here. The close-up of Orton getting those stuck in his back was gruesome. It made me cringe, the audience cringe. And, even when he was getting pinned, the commentators were saying, how could he kick out? He had to kick out if he wanted. He didn't kick out probably because he wanted to. He kicked out because he couldn't lay down because the thumbtacks were kind of spearing him right in the back. It was so painful. So that was a great spot. They take it to this top of the stage, and Mick Foley just fucking tossing Orton over the side of the stage into some disarray on the ground, some cardboard, whatever the hell it was. I don't even know what to call it. Some thing on the side of the stage. He tossed him off the stage into that. It looked brutal. Orton was, just down and out, and Foley just soaking in the cheers out of nowhere in typical Foley fashion, jumping off the stage with a perfectly placed elbow. Maybe it was not placed well. Maybe it landed, on the side of his. But the camera angle that they got, it looked like it nailed him straight in the chest, like a perfectly placed and a great shot from the camera guy. I give them shit sometimes for their terrible camera job, and more often, now recently than it was back then, but when they get the camera shots right, they get them right, and this was a prime example of that. Just a phenomenal spot with Orton, being just taken that elbow like a champ, and that should have been it right there. Foley would actually take him back into the ring, hit the double arm DDT, and you would think that would be it, but he kicked out. Again, hitting 2 RKOs, I think one in the thumbtacks, and then one again, maybe again on a stop sign or the barbed wire bat or whatever it was. 2, not 1, but 2 RKOs on the Hardcore Legend, take him out, retain his title, and win the match, and in turn, solidifying his legacy as the Legend Killer. And as Triple H told him when he was walking to the back, he became the Legend on that night instead of the Legend Killer. Just a phenomenal matchup, and arguably, easily, I mean, I know this goes without saying, but definitely one of the best matches in Orton's career. I'm trying to think of a better match. I love the match with Rollins and everything else that he's had in recent years, his matches, the showings that he had in 2010, the matches with Christian. Huge Orton fan here, but, speaking at his overall body of work, no match was better from both an in-ring standpoint and a storytelling standpoint, and the impact it made in Orton's career, I think, moreover than anything else. Like I said, kind of establishing him as a main event player, even though he was still the Intercontinental Champion, and even though the Intercontinental Championship was not the prime focus of this matchup, it really lent a lot to the credibility of both guys, and it did a lot to boost the prestige of that championship, both even, the Orton retaining it and becoming one of the longest reigning champions in years for the Intercontinental Championship anyway. So it did a lot to benefit Orton, benefit the championship, and make Mick Foley looked very strong on the feet too, and kind of solidifying his legacy as a hardcore guy and his best showing in years. I know that goes without saying because he didn't have many showings from the time he retired in 2000 up to this point. But like I said before, this would have been the perfect match for Foley to close out his career on. I'm not the biggest hardcore wrestling fan. I say that all the time in my reviews of Impact Wrestling. I'm not a huge fan of hardcore wrestling, I watch the ECW pay-per-views and they're enjoyable. In small spurts, like in small doses, I enjoy hardcore wrestling when it's not oversaturated and overdone, overexposed. I enjoy it when it's not done every single fucking week like it is in TNA. But in matches like this, when it's done occasionally, is that the word, occasionally, and sporadically and done right, they can be amazing. And that's exactly what this matchup was. Enjoyed every single minute of this. I thought it was phenomenal. Definitely on par, if not better than the main event, which I'll get to in a few minutes. So a tag team match up next. Really nothing up for grabs. I was a little taken aback by that. I mean, I know the World Tag Team titles were not defended on this show as Ric Flair faced Shelton Benjamin and the Tag Team Champions at this point in time were Flair and Batista. So the World Tag Team titles were not defended on this show. And this was the Raw show. The WWE Tag Team Championships were not defended. This was after the brand split was put into place and the pay-per-views were split up by brand. So nothing up for grabs in this matchup. Rosie and the Hurricane taking on La Resistance. The only noteworthy thing about this matchup was he didn't debut on the show, but he had recently debuted Eugene. A guilty pleasure of mine, a dumb gimmick. It was very offensive towards people that were actually mentally challenged. Something like that would never fly in today's WWE. But he's a guilty pleasure of mine. I always thought Eugene was really funny. The greatest wrestler, of course not, but in any role that he was put in, he was always a lot of fun to watch. So I think he came in and cost La Resistance the win. Like I said, nothing up for grabs, a throwaway tag team match. But it's always fun to see Eugene, nevertheless. Up next, Edge versus Kane, a match that was surprised, that the crowd was not more into. This was Edge's backyard. I know this is not exactly where he grew up, but he was from Canada. He was a fan favorite coming off of his near 14-month injury after being injured in February of 2003 at the No Way Out pay-per-view, returning to action upon being drafted to Raw only a couple of weeks before this, taking on Kane. They did kind of recap Edge's journey up to this point, what led to this matchup. I can't remember exactly why this match even happened. They did mention at one point that Kane was the reason why Edge was taken out, and I don't think that was the case. I know there was a 6-man tag team match at No Way Out in February of 2003, as I mentioned before, but Kane was not involved. And I read on Wiki that Edge was attacked before the matchup, and unless he was attacked by Kane, which I don't think he was, then I don't know what the meaning behind this matchup was. They were just looking for someone Edge to beat in his first match back. And I mean, people were not very receptive to Edge as a babyface, as they were in 2002 and 2003. I think by this point, he kind of lost a lot of that luster, and eventually leading to him turning heel in the best role they could have ever played and the best move they could have ever made with his character. A good match, though, only went 6 or 7 minutes, kind of a buffer match right before the main event, so in that respect, it served its purpose. The crowd was not as hot for it as I would have expected them to be, but it was a nice first win for Edge coming off of his injury for 14 months. So that brings us to the main event for the World Heavyweight Championship. Chris Benoit defending against Shawn Michaels and Triple H. Now, what made this matchup so special was that it was, arguably one of the greatest WrestleMania main events of all time. I think I ranked it in my top 10, maybe even top 5. I can't remember exactly. If you want to check it out, cheap plug over on nextEraWrestling.net. John @John's Jargon and I ranked every main event in WrestleMania history. This was definitely up there. Fantastically wrestled matchup. But what made this matchup more special than that one was that Benoit was coming in as the defending champion, but this pay-per-view was, hailing from his backyard of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Of all the Canadian people to show up on the show, for Trish and Christian and Jericho and Edge, they were by far the hottest for Benoit. That goes without saying, they were by far the hottest for Benoit. But still, the guy came off like an absolute star on this show. And he was for the majority of 2004, but it's a shame that up until his death 3 years later, they really didn't do much with him. I know he was a former Intercontinental Champion, a former United States Champion in his final years over on the SmackDown and ECW brand. Just barely, I know he was on that show for. But he was never again really considered a threat to either of the World Championships. So that kind of like fun little experiment, let's give him a bell, and that's pretty much it. Much like Daniel Bryan, which I hope it's not the case. I think Bryan is the better overall package than Benoit in terms of main event star potential. That's another discussion for another day. But still, when he was champion, he was fucking over people. I mean, I tell you, the guy was over as all hell on this show. To the point where Shawn Michaels, a fellow babyface, was getting cheered by the crowd. And this wasn't, 2005 where he kind of turned heel for a month in his feud with Hulk Hogan going into SummerSlam. He was still a fan favorite. He was still a babyface going into the show, and he was treated like an absolute heel in Canada. And it was perfectly fitting, too. I love the storyline. I know it's been done to death over the years, but I love the time because this was Canada. So only 7 years prior to this point did Shawn Michaels, along with Vince and everyone else, screw over Bret Hart and the Montreal Screwjob. I know this was not Montreal, but it was Canada. It was close enough. And, he got the "You Screwed Bret" chants very, very loudly. And an amazing spot. Now, what I thought was the spot of the match, I mean, the whole matchup was great. The in-ring chemistry these three had being billed as the final encounter and whatever else. They had that big fight feel to it, and it was an amazingly well-wrestled matchup. But my favorite spot of the matchup had to be when the referee was knocked down, which I'm never a fan of, like, another referee spot, knockdown referee, whatever. But in place of the knockdown referee came down Earl Hebner, of all people, who was a prominent player, of course, in the Montreal Screwjob and screwing over Bret Hart. So when he came down, the people just erupted with boos, and it was funny because whenever Benoit was not on offense, this crowd shit over anything that Triple H and even HBK did. They booed the hell out of those guys on this show. Benoit was the very, very heavily favored guy, and rightfully so. But you would think that they would at least have respect for what the other guys were doing. They weren't having any of it. Anything that Benoit was not doing and the other two were, they just booed for. And it was funny to see it. But like I said before, and it was a great matchup, fantastic matchup, definitely on par with their with the three-way from WrestleMania 21 month prior. And Benoit coming out of this thing a star. I think he locked in the crippler crossface on HBK, kind of a mirror image of WrestleMania 20. Triple H was out on the outside and was kind of crawling his way back into the ring to break up the submission from Shawn Michaels. And before he could, HBK tapped out, giving Benoit the win. Still the World Heavyweight Champion. Crowd erupts in a very special moment. And I tweeted a picture of that out on Twitter yesterday and saying it was a great match. A little screen cap of the pre-match graphic of Benoit, Triple H, and Shawn Michaels for the World Heavyweight title from the show. And I think it was at the Average Grunt that replied back saying that, the Benoit saga, as he called it, from the Rumble to WrestleMania to this match, was one of his favorite of all time. And I can definitely see that. I mean, the guy was so over from the time he won the Rumble to this time in Canada. He was still over after this point as well, but I think this was kind of the peak of his, the pinnacle of his world championship run, maybe even of his career. I know that came at WrestleMania, and then people always look back at the WrestleMania matches being the greatest of all time, but people often underestimate the greatness that was this matchup. So a phenomenal main event, like I said before. Loved every single second of it. Both this matchup and Orton versus Cactus Jack are well worth it going out of your way to watch from this show. watch the show if only for those 2 matches. If there's one match from the show that you should watch, man, it's really hard to say because I really love the main event and Orton versus Cactus Jack. I'd probably have to say Orton versus Cactus Jack, if only the only thing that has over the triple threat is that it has more of a lasting impression, and that the WWE can actually mention it and reference it due to Benoit not being involved. But like I said, it made Orton a star. Benoit was kind of already a star by this point, and the reaction he got was thunderous, was kind of giving me chills just listening to it, thinking about it even right now. But that match that he had with Foley, that Orton had with Foley earlier on in the evening, made him into what he's become today. Had it not been for that matchup, he still probably wouldn't have gotten into the top regardless. But it really made people look at Orton in an all-new light with respect and as a hardcore wrestler, as an in-ring technician, as the full package ready for that main event scene. So, just 2 phenomenal matches. The rest of the card was not too bad. I thought it was pretty solid for the most part, much like the other Backlash shows. Benjamin and Flair, very good matchup. John and the Coach went into Jerry, kind of fulfilled that sports entertainment aspect of the show. Jericho, Christian, and Trish having a very fun match as well. Victoria and Lita, a good match. Nothing too memorable, but a good match. The Rosie Hurricane La Resistance match was complete throwaway, but I love the involvement of Eugene towards the end. And Edge and Kane was solid, nothing great, but it was a good, solid matchup. So the 2 matches, the 2 biggest matches coming out of the show for the World and Intercontinental Championships, exceeded expectations, more than delivered, and like I said before, are well worth watching from this show if you don't watch the entire show on the whole in its entirety. So that's going to do it for my review of Backlash 2004. Strongly suggest that you go back and watch it on the WWE Network. An excellent pay-per-view on the whole, kind of continuing the streak of awesome Backlash shows. I have yet to watch the 05 installment. My review of that will be up on Tuesday. I have yet to watch it from the point of recording this. So I look forward to watching that show. I know there's a lot of great Backlash shows, both in 05 and 08 as well. I'm looking forward to, maybe even 06 and 07. I look forward to it regardless. But as always, guys, make sure to show your support by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. All your support is greatly appreciated. It means a lot to me, so continue to do so. And as I say in every single one of my videos, I publish a video every single day of the week, so there is no reason not to be subscribed to the channel. If you subscribe, you'll get a notification every time a new video comes up, whether it's a WrestleRant video with my review of whatever I'm watching on the network, or a hashtag AskGSM video, random video blog, WrestleRant radio excerpts, and everything else in between. So make sure to subscribe, like, comment, like I said before. Find me on Facebook at facebook.com/graham.gsm.matthews, on Twitter at WrestleRant, and at Next Era Wrestling at nextEraWrestling.net. My written reviews of Raw, SmackDown, TNA, Lucha Underground, Main Event, Superstars, NXT, and anything you can possibly think of is up there on the website.